The thunder of approaching hooves announced trouble long before Josephine Fairchild saw it. Standing in the doorway of her modest cabin, she smoothed her apron over the subtle curve of her belly, carefully concealed beneath layers of fabric. 6 months along now, but no one in Sonora, Texas knew. No one could know. The year was 1875, and in this dusty frontier town, an unmarried woman with child was worse than a criminal. She was a pariah. Josephine watched the rider approach, her heart hammering against her ribs as she recognized the silhouette Hunter Dawson, the newest rancher to stake a claim in Crockett County, a man whose piercing blue eyes seemed to see everything. "Miss Fairchild," he called out, pulling his chestnut stallion to a stop. "Came by to see if you needed anything from town." His voice carried the slight drawl of a man born in Tennessee but who'd spent years in the West. "Nothing at all, Mr. Dawson, but I thank you for your consideration," she replied, shifting slightly to ensure her secret remained hidden. Hunter dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. At 30, he had the weathered look of someone who'd faced the elements and won, his tanned skin telling stories of long days under the Texas sun. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled at the edges from sweat. "Been meaning to ask why you haven't been at the social gatherings lately," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly as they studied her face. "Town's been wondering about you." Josephine felt her throat tighten. "I've been quite occupied with my sewing business. The women of Sonora are keeping me very busy with their demands." Hunter nodded slowly, but his eyes drifted momentarily to her midsection before returning to her face. The slight pause in his gaze was enough to send ice through her veins. "Well, if you need anything." He trailed off, replacing his hat. As he turned to mount his horse, a sudden gust of wind whipped around the cabin, catching Josephine's apron and pressing the fabric against the unmistakable curve of her belly. She gasped, quickly smoothing it down, but it was too late. When she looked up, Hunter's eyes were fixed on her middle, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Dawson," she began, her voice trembling. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to hide, Miss Fairchild." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Josephine felt tears burning behind her eyes as the secret she'd guarded so carefully for months was exposed in an instant. "I don't know what you're implying," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Hunter glanced around, ensuring they were truly alone. "I've seen the way you've withdrawn from town, how you wear those loose dresses, the way you avoid the doctor. I know what you're hiding." Josephine felt her legs weaken. She'd been so careful, ordering fabric from a catalog to make larger dresses, giving excuses about rheumatism to avoid social gatherings, planning to leave town before she became too obvious. But all for nothing. One gust of wind and her carefully constructed facade had crumbled. "If you tell anyone, I'll be ruined," she said, her voice breaking. Hunter shook his head. "I'm not here to ruin you, Miss Fairchild. I'm here to help you." "Help me? Why would you help me? You barely know me." Josephine's voice was laced with suspicion. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return, because no one should face this world alone, especially not out here. His eyes softened. "May I come in? I believe we have things to discuss." Hesitantly, Josephine stepped aside, allowing him into her small cabin. It was neat and tidy, with evidence of her sewing business scattered about patterns, fabric, a dress form in the corner. Hunter removed his hat again, holding it respectfully in his hands as he took in his surroundings. "How far along are you?" he asked bluntly. Josephine sank into a chair, resignation washing over her. 6 months. Hunter nodded, taking a seat across from her. "And the father," she stiffened. "Not in the picture and not by choice mine or his." "I understand," Hunter said quietly, though she doubted he truly could. "How could any man understand what she'd been through? Do you?" Josephine challenged. "Do you understand that I was engaged to be married to Thomas before he was killed in that stage robbery, that I discovered my condition 2 weeks after we buried him? That his parents blamed me for his death because I was the reason he took that job escorting the stage in the first place to earn money for our future." The words tumbled out, months of pent-up grief and fear breaking free like a dam bursting. Hunter sat silently, allowing her to speak. Do you understand what it means to be a woman alone in this world, Mr. Dawson? To carry a child who will bear the stigma of being fatherless? To know that this town would run me out on a rail if they knew the truth? No, Hunter admitted, his voice steady. I can't claim to understand all of that, but I do understand loss and judgment, and I understand that you need help whether you're ready to admit it or not. Josephine wiped away angry tears. What do you propose? That I simply announce my condition to the good people of Sonora? Perhaps I could ring the church bell while I'm at it. A hint of a smile touched Hunter's lips. Your sarcasm is noted, Miss Fairchild, but no, I propose something a bit more practical. Which is, marry me. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Josephine stared at him, certain she had misheard. I beg your pardon, marry me, Hunter repeated calmly, as if he were suggesting nothing more extraordinary than a ride into town. It solves your problem. You'd have protection, financial security, and the child would have a name. Josephine laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. Mr. Dawson, have you lost your mind? We barely know each other. I've spoken to you perhaps a dozen times since you arrived in Sonora 3 months ago. Sometimes a dozen conversations tell you all you need to know about a person's character, he replied. I know you're hardworking, honest, and kind. The women in town speak highly of your skills and your discretion. I've watched how you help Mrs. Peterson with her children when her husband is away. I've seen you give food to that old miner who can barely feed himself. You've been watching me, she said, uncomfortable with the realization. I notice things. It's kept me alive. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Look, I'm not proposing love, Miss Fairchild. I'm proposing a partnership. I have land but no family. You have a child coming but no security. It makes sense. It's madness, she countered. People will talk, they'll calculate. Let them. We'll say we were secretly courting, that we married quickly because of my duties at the ranch. By the time the child comes, most will have forgotten the timeline, and those who haven't won't say anything to my face. The confidence in his voice was almost convincing, but Josephine shook her head. Why would you do this? What do you get from such an arrangement? Hunter's eyes held her steadily. Not everyone has ulterior motives, Miss Fairchild. Sometimes people just want to help. In my experience, Mr. Dawson, that's rarely true. Then allow me to change your experience. He stood up, placing his hat on his head. Think about it. I'll return tomorrow for your answer. With that, he left, the door closing softly behind him. Josephine sat motionless in her chair, trying to process what had just happened. A man she barely knew had discovered her secret and instead of exposing her, had offered marriage. It was too incredible to be believed, and yet, as she placed a protective hand over her belly, she allowed herself to consider it. What choice did she really have? She had enough money saved to leave Sonora, but where would she go? How would she support herself and a child? The world was not kind to women in her position. Hunter Dawson was offering her respectability, security, and protection. But at what cost? Men always wanted something. What would he expect from her? And could she bear to be married to a man she didn't love, after having known the joy of true love with Thomas? As night fell over Sonora, Josephine prepared for bed with her mind still whirling. Sleep would not come easily tonight, not with such a life-altering decision looming before her. Morning arrived with no clarity. Josephine moved through her daily routine mechanically, her mind still wrestling with Hunter's proposal. She was hemming a dress for the mayor's wife when she heard horses outside. Looking through the window, she saw not one but 3 riders approaching Hunter and 2 men she recognized as his ranch hands. Heart pounding, she opened the door before they could knock. Hunter dismounted, looking as calm and collected as he had the day before. Miss Fairchild, he greeted her. Have you thought about my offer? I have, she replied cautiously, eyeing the other men, but I don't understand why you've brought company. If your answer is yes, I thought we might head to town immediately. Pastor Williams could marry us today. These men are witnesses. Hunter gestured to the men behind him. And if your answer is no, they never heard a word of our conversation yesterday. The directness of his approach both startled and impressed her. He wasn't one to waste time, this Hunter Dawson. This is. Quite sudden, she said, stalling for time even as she realized that her decision had already been made. What real choice did she have? Life in these parts often is, Hunter replied. Sudden storms, sudden opportunities, sudden dangers, we adapt or we perish. Josephine took a deep breath. Very well, Mr. Dawson, I accept your proposal. Something flickered in his eyes, relief, perhaps, or satisfaction. He nodded. Good, pack what you need for a few days. We'll return for the rest of your belongings later. It took Josephine less than 30 minutes to gather what she needed. She changed into her best dress, a dark blue calico that did the best job of concealing her condition, and packed a carpet bag with essentials. As she moved about the cabin, she felt as though she were in a dream, disconnected from reality. When she emerged, Hunter helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her. The feeling of sitting in front of him, his arms around her to hold the reins, was uncomfortably intimate. She had not been this close to a man since Thomas, and the comparison was unavoidable. Where Thomas had been lean and wiry, Hunter was solid and broad. Where Thomas had smelled of the leather goods he crafted, Hunter carried the scent of horses, pine, and open air. The ride to Sonora was largely silent. Josephine was grateful that Hunter didn't attempt small talk. What was there to say? They were strangers about to be bound in the most sacred of unions, for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with necessity. Sonora in 1875 was still a rough-edged town, despite its growing population of nearly 500 souls. The main street boasted a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a bank, and the white clapboard church where Pastor Williams presided. As they rode in, Josephine felt eyes on them, curious glances from townsfolk wondering why Hunter Dawson was riding with the seamstress perched in front of him. They dismounted in front of the church, and Hunter offered his arm. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Josephine nodded, though ready was the last thing she felt. They entered the church together, the two ranch hands following at a respectful distance. Pastor Williams was surprised by their request, but agreed to perform the ceremony immediately. As a man who'd spent 30 years on the frontier, he was accustomed to the sometimes hasty nature of Western marriages. Questions might be raised later, but for now he was content to join these two people as they requested. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory. Josephine felt as though she were watching from outside herself as she repeated the vows, promising to love, honor, and obey a man she barely knew. When Hunter slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, where had he gotten a ring on such short notice? The metal felt cold and foreign against her skin. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife," Pastor Williams declared. "You may kiss your bride." Hunter's eyes met hers, a question in them. Josephine gave a slight nod. His kiss was gentle and brief, a mere brush of lips, but it sent an unexpected warmth through her. It had been so long since she'd been touched with any kind of tenderness. After signing the marriage certificate and accepting Pastor Williams' somewhat bewildered congratulations, they emerged from the church to find a small crowd had gathered. News traveled fast in Sonora. "Well, look at this," boomed the voice of Mayor Jenkins, approaching with his wife on his arm. "Dawson's gone and got himself hitched, and to our lovely seamstress, no less." Josephine tensed, but Hunter's arm around her waist was steady. "Yes, sir," he replied easily. "Been courting Miss Fairchild, Mrs. Dawson, now quiet like for a while, figured it was time to make it official. Mrs." Jenkins gave Josephine an appraising look, her eyes lingering a moment too long on her midsection. "Well, isn't this a surprise? You've kept your secrets well, Josephine. I had no idea you two were acquainted." "Some things are better kept private, Martha," Josephine replied, forcing a smile. "Especially in the beginning." "Well, I think it's wonderful," said Mrs. Peterson, pushing her way forward. "Hunter Dawson is a fine man, and you deserve happiness after losing Thomas so tragically." The mention of Thomas sent a pang through Josephine's heart, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you, Sarah, that's very kind." More townspeople approached, offering congratulations. Some seemed genuinely pleased, others clearly suspicious of the sudden union. Hunter fielded questions with an ease that Josephine envied, spinning a tale of quiet courtship and growing affection that sounded almost believable. When the butcher's wife pointedly asked how long they'd been keeping company, Hunter smiled and said, "Long enough to know my heart," which satisfied some but left others whispering behind their hands. Finally, Hunter announced that they needed to return to the ranch. He helped Josephine back onto his horse and they rode out of town, the ranch hands following at a distance that offered a semblance of privacy. "You handled that well," Josephine said when they were beyond the town limits. "Not my first time dealing with nosy folks," Hunter replied. "But it won't be the last. People will talk for a while, then something more interesting will come along. And if it doesn't, then we'll give them something else to talk about." She could hear the smile in his voice, though she couldn't see his face. "Maybe I'll have a shootout with Black Jack Ketchum." Despite herself, Josephine laughed. "Please don't, I'd rather not be a widow twice over." His arms tightened slightly around her. "No, I don't imagine you would." They rode in companionable silence for a time, the Texas landscape stretching out around them. Spring was in full bloom, with wildflowers dotting the grasslands and the occasional oak tree providing welcome shade. "I should warn you about the ranch," Hunter said eventually. "It's not what you might be expecting. Oh, it's still a work in progress. I've only owned it for 6 months. The previous owner let it fall into disrepair." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Dawson." "Hunter," he corrected gently. "I think we're well past formalities now, Mrs. Dawson." The name sent a shiver through her. Mrs. Dawson, not Mrs. Thomas Jenkins as she'd once dreamed, but Mrs. Hunter Dawson. Life had a strange way of unfolding. "Hunter," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue, "and you should call me Josephine or Josie if you prefer, most do." "Josephine," he said, as if savoring the sound. "It suits you better, elegant like you." She wasn't sure how to respond to the compliment, so she remained silent. They crested a hill, and Hunter's ranch came into view. Josephine had heard it was one of the smaller spreads in the area, and now she could see why. The main house was modest, larger than her cabin, but not by much, with a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. About 24 cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, with a few horses among them. "It's not much," Hunter said, almost apologetically, "but the land is good, and I've got plans to expand. There's a stream that runs year-round on the north side and enough grazing land to support 3 times the herd I have now." "It looks peaceful," Josephine said honestly. After the tension of the past months, hiding and worrying, peace was what she craved most. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to meet them, a large, shaggy beast with one ear standing up and the other flopped over. It barked enthusiastically, circling Hunter's horse. "That's Ranger," Hunter said. "He's friendly, just loud." They dismounted in front of the house and Hunter took her carpet bag. "Come on, I'll show you around." The interior of the house was simple but clean. A main room served as both parlor and dining area with a stone fireplace along one wall. A kitchen extended off the back and 2 doors led to what Josephine assumed were bedrooms. The furniture was utilitarian, a table with 4 chairs, a sofa that had seen better days, a bookshelf surprisingly full of books. "It's not fancy," Hunter said, watching her take it all in. "But it's solid. No leaks in the roof and the chimney draws well." "It's lovely," Josephine said, and meant it. After living alone in her tiny cabin, this house felt spacious and welcoming. Hunter showed her to the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. "I thought you might like your own space," he said. "I know this isn't. Well, I know it's not a love match. You should have privacy." Josephine was taken aback by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she said softly. He set her carpet bag on the bed. "I'll let you get settled. Supper's usually around 6. "Nothing fancy. Hope you don't mind simple cooking." "Not at all. And I can cook, you know. I wouldn't expect you to do everything." Hunter smiled, the expression transforming his face. He was handsome, Josephine realized with a start. Not in the refined way Thomas had been, but in a rugged, weather-beaten way that spoke of strength and resilience. "We'll figure it out as we go," he said. "That's how most things work out here anyway." With that, he left her alone to unpack and adjust to her new reality. Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. This morning, she'd been a desperate woman with few options. Tonight, she was a married lady with a home and a husband. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but perhaps it could be a good one nonetheless. As she unpacked her few belongings, she allowed herself to hope, just a little, that this hasty arrangement might bring her something she hadn't expected: peace. The first week of marriage passed in a blur of adjustments and introductions. Hunter's ranch hands Pete Simmons, a grizzled veteran of the range, and Micah Johnson, a quiet young man barely out of his teens, were polite but clearly curious about their boss's sudden marriage. Neither asked direct questions, for which Josephine was grateful. She quickly established a routine, rising early to prepare breakfast for Hunter and the men before they headed out to work the cattle. The house needed attention. While not dirty, it had the neglected feel of a place inhabited solely by men with little time or inclination for homemaking. Josephine took satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos organizing the kitchen, hanging curtains she fashioned from fabric she found in a trunk, and adding small touches that made the house feel more like a home. Hunter returned each evening tired but invariably took time to ask about her day and tell her about his. They ate supper together, sometimes joined by Pete and Micah, sometimes just the two of them. After supper, Hunter often read by the fire while Josephine sewed. It was a quiet, companionable existence, nothing like the passionate love she'd shared with Thomas, but comfortable in its own way. They slept in separate rooms, as Hunter had promised. Sometimes, in the dark of night, Josephine wondered what it would be like to share his bed, to feel the warmth of another body beside hers again. But those thoughts were quickly banished. Theirs was a marriage of convenience, not passion. On the 8th day, as Josephine was hanging laundry in the yard, she saw a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of Sonora. Shielding her eyes against the sun, she made out a buggy being driven at a good clip. "Hunter," she called, knowing he was in the barn. He emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. "What is it?" "Company coming," she said, nodding toward the approaching vehicle. Hunter squinted, then his expression hardened. "Mrs. Jenkins, wonder what brings her out here?" Josephine felt a chill despite the warm spring day. Martha Jenkins was the mayor's wife and the self-appointed moral authority of Sonora. Her visits were rarely social, they were inspections, judgments. "She's coming to see if I'm showing," Josephine said quietly, to confirm her suspicions. Hunter stepped closer, his voice low. "You don't have to see her if you don't want to. I can send her away." The offer was tempting, but Josephine shook her head. That would only make her more suspicious. Better to face her directly. "All right, but remember, you're Mrs. Hunter Dawson now. You don't answer to her or anyone else in that town." The confidence in his voice gave Josephine strength. By the time Mrs. Jenkins pulled her buggy to a stop in front of the house, Josephine had composed herself, standing straight-backed beside her husband. "Mrs. Jenkins," she called, forcing warmth into her voice. "What a surprise. You're a long way from town." Martha Jenkins was a stout woman in her 50s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and small, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She descended from the buggy with Hunter's assistance, though she seemed reluctant to take his hand. "I thought it high time I paid a call on the newest bride in the county," she said, her gaze sweeping over Josephine with barely concealed scrutiny. "It's not every day one of our town's young ladies marries so precipitously." "Kind of you to make the journey," Hunter said, his tone pleasant but firm. "Won't you come inside? Josephine just made a fresh pot of coffee." Inside the house, Martha inspected everything with the same critical eye she'd turned on Josephine. She commented on the curtains. "Quite a homey touch. The books, my, quite the scholar, aren't you, Mr. Dawson? And the general state of the ranch, coming along, I suppose, though it's nothing like the Patterson spread." Throughout it all, Josephine served coffee and the last of the apple cake she'd baked the day before, maintaining a polite smile that grew increasingly strained. She could feel Martha's eyes returning again and again to her midsection, which was thankfully still possible to disguise with the right clothing. Finally, Martha set down her coffee cup with a decisive clink. "Well, I must say, Josephine, marriage seems to agree with you. You're positively glowing. Some might even say you have that special radiance that comes with expectant motherhood." The room went still. Hunter's hand, which had been reaching for his coffee, froze midair. "Thank you, Martha," Josephine said calmly. I've always found that happiness brings a certain glow. Being married to Hunter has brought me great joy. Martha's smile didn't reach her eyes. Indeed. And how fortunate that you found each other so quickly after your mourning period for poor Thomas ended. Some might call it unseemly haste, but I suppose when two hearts are destined to be together. Hunter's chair scraped back as he stood. Mrs. Jenkins, I appreciate your visit, but I believe you're overstepping. My wife and I don't owe explanations about our marriage to anyone, not even the mayor's wife. Martha's face flushed an angry red. Well, I'm sure you didn't mean any offense, Josephine interjected quickly, shooting Hunter a warning glance. Antagonizing Martha Jenkins would only make matters worse. It's natural to be curious, our courtship was private and our marriage sudden. But sometimes, when you know something is right, waiting seems foolish, Martha sniffed. Perhaps, though in my experience, haste often leads to regret. Not in this case, Hunter said, his voice softer now as he looked at Josephine. Something in his expression made her heart flutter unexpectedly. Some decisions, even hasty ones, are exactly right. The genuine affection in his voice seemed to take Martha aback. She studied them both, her suspicion momentarily giving way to confusion. Yes, well, she said finally. I should be getting back to town. Edward will be wondering where I've gone. They walked her to her buggy, maintaining a united front. As Hunter helped her up, Martha leaned down and said in a voice meant only for him, I hope you know what you're doing, Mr. Dawson. Taking on another man's responsibility is a generous act, but one many men come to resent. Josephine, standing close enough to hear, felt her cheeks burn with shame, but Hunter's response was calm and measured. The only responsibility I've taken on, Mrs. Jenkins, is to be a good husband to my wife, and that's a responsibility I bear gladly. Martha drove away without another word, the dust from her buggy hanging in the air long after she'd disappeared from view. I'm sorry, Josephine said once they were alone. I knew she would come eventually, but I'd hoped for more time. Hunter shook his head. Don't apologize. You handled her perfectly. He paused, then added, you should prepare yourself, though. She won't be the last, and she'll certainly spread whatever suspicions she has throughout Sonora. I know, Josephine sighed. Perhaps it would be best if I didn't go into town for a while. If that's what you want. But remember what I told you, you don't have to hide anymore. Let them talk. They'll tire of it eventually. His confidence was reassuring, but Josephine knew the reality would be harder than he imagined. Small towns had long memories, and scandals provided fodder for gossip for years. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire, Josephine finally asked the question that had been on her mind since Martha's visit. Hunter, what happens when the baby comes? Will you truly be able to treat it as your own, knowing it's another man's child? He looked up from his book, his expression thoughtful. The way I see it, the baby will be my child in every way that matters. I'll be the one teaching it to ride, to read, to face the world. Biology doesn't make a father, love and presence do. His words brought unexpected tears to Josephine's eyes. That's a generous way to look at it. It's the only way that makes sense to me. He hesitated, then added, my own father wasn't much for affection or guidance. He was there physically but absent in all the ways that mattered. I've always thought that if I ever had children, I'd do better by them. This may not be how I imagined it happening, but the principle stands. Josephine studied him, seeing him in a new light. You're a good man, Hunter Dawson. He smiled, a touch of sadness in it. I try to be, don't always succeed, but I try. The moment lingered between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Finally, Josephine returned to her sewing and Hunter to his book, but something had shifted. A door had opened, just a crack, to possibilities neither had considered when they'd entered this practical arrangement. As spring gave way to summer, Josephine's pregnancy became impossible to hide. Her body blossomed with the new life growing within her, and despite the challenges ahead, she found herself embracing the changes rather than concealing them. Hunter's acceptance was unwavering. He treated her condition as natural and beautiful, not as something shameful. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Josephine felt the baby move, not the fluttering she'd grown accustomed to, but a definite kick. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. What is it? Hunter asked, immediately concerned. Are you in pain? No, she said, laughing softly. The baby's kicking. Here. Without thinking, she reached for his hand and placed it on the spot where she'd felt the movement. They both froze at the contact, the intimacy of it catching them by surprise. Josephine nearly pulled away, but then the baby kicked again, right against Hunter's palm, and his face transformed with wonder. That's incredible, he whispered, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, they were not two people thrown together by circumstance, but a man and woman sharing something miraculous. Josephine felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching riders. Hunter withdrew his hand reluctantly, standing to peer into the gathering dusk, his posture tensed. Who is it? Josephine asked, struggling to rise from her chair. Hunter offered his hand, helping her up. Looks like Jeremiah Blackwell and his men, Hunter said grimly. Best if you go inside. Why, who is Jeremiah Blackwell? Wealthy rancher from over by Del Rio. He's been trying to buy up all the small ranches in the area, made me an offer when I first arrived, wasn't interested. The riders pulled up in front of the house, 5 men led by a corpulent figure on a large black horse. Jeremiah Blackwell was in his 50s, with a florid face partially hidden by an enormous white mustache. He wore an expensive suit despite the heat, and a diamond stickpin gleamed in his cravat. Dawson, he called, not bothering to dismount. Been a while since we talked. Mr. Blackwell, Hunter acknowledged coolly. What brings you to my property? Blackwell's gaze shifted to Josephine, his eyebrows rising. Well now, heard you'd gotten hitched, but didn't believe it till now. He tipped his hat to her. Madam. Josephine nodded but said nothing, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Congratulations are in order, I see, Blackwell continued, his smile not reaching his eyes. All the more reason for you to reconsider my offer, Dawson, family man now. Might be nice to have a fat bank account instead of a struggling ranch. My ranch isn't struggling, Hunter replied evenly. And it's not for sale, same answer as last time. Blackwell's smile faded. Things change, Dawson, markets shift, cattle prices are dropping. Small operations like yours are the first to feel the pinch. I appreciate your concern for my financial welfare, Hunter said, his tone making it clear he believed nothing of the sort. But my answer stands. One of Blackwell's men, a thin, hard-faced individual with a nasty scar across his cheek, leaned forward in his saddle. Boss is making you a generous offer. Be a shame if something happened to make this place less valuable. The threat was thinly veiled, and Hunter's hand drifted closer to the pistol at his hip. That sounds remarkably like a threat, mister. Malone, Jake Malone, and it ain't a threat, just an observation. Accidents happen all the time out here. Wells get poisoned, fences get cut, cattle wander off. That's enough, Malone, Blackwell said sharply, though he didn't look displeased by his man's words. We're just having a civilized conversation here. You've had your conversation, and you have my answer, Hunter said. Now I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my property. My wife shouldn't be out in the evening air in her condition. Blackwell's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. I'll be back, Dawson. Price won't always be this good. He turned his horse, but paused to add, congratulations again on the impending arrival. Always good to see a family growing. The emphasis he placed on the word growing carried an unpleasant insinuation. The men rode off, dust swirling in their wake. Hunter watched until they were out of sight before turning to Josephine. I'm sorry about that, he said. Blackwell's been a thorn in the side of every small rancher in the county. Why does he want your land so badly? Hunter sighed, guiding her back to her chair before taking his own. Water rights, mainly. There's a good spring on my property, and he knows it. Water's more valuable than gold out here, especially in dry years. Will he cause trouble, do you think? He already is. Lost 3 Kevs last month, found them shot. Can't prove it was him or his men, but the timing's suspicious. Josephine felt a flutter of fear. Hunter, if it's dangerous, it's not, he interrupted firmly. Blackwell's all bluster. He thinks he can intimidate me into selling, but he's mistaken. What about that man, Malone? He seemed more than bluster. Hunter's expression darkened. Malone's a hired gun, not a rancher. He's dangerous, but he won't do anything without Blackwell's say-so, and Blackwell's too careful to order anything too obvious. Josephine wasn't convinced, but she nodded, not wanting to add to Hunter's concerns. They sat in silence for a time, watching as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Finally, Hunter spoke again. "Sometimes I think about selling," he admitted quietly, "taking the money and going somewhere else, starting fresh. But then I look at this land and I can't imagine giving it up. It's become part of me." "I understand," Josephine said softly. "It becomes more than just a place, it becomes home." He turned to her, his expression serious. "Is it becoming that for you, a home?" The question caught her off guard. Was this place home? When she'd married Hunter, she'd seen it purely as a refuge, a solution to her immediate problem. But over the past weeks, she'd begun to feel differently. She'd put her mark on the house, planted flowers by the porch, learned the rhythms of ranch life. And despite the unconventional nature of their marriage, she'd begun to feel a connection to Hunter that went beyond gratitude. "Yes," she said finally, "it is becoming home." The smile that spread across Hunter's face was worth any uncertainty she might have felt. In that moment, Josephine realized that making Hunter happy had become important to her in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." As they sat in companionable silence, Josephine found herself thinking that perhaps this marriage of convenience was becoming something more. Something neither of them had expected, but something precious nonetheless. July brought scorching heat to Texas, the kind that shimmered above the ground and drove both man and beast to seek shade during the hottest part of the day. Josephine, now 7 months pregnant, found the heat particularly challenging. Her ankles swelled, and even the simplest tasks left her breathless. Hunter insisted she rest during the afternoons, often bringing her cool water and checking on her between his ranch duties. One particularly hot afternoon, as Josephine dozed on the sofa, she was awakened by the sound of horses and men's voices. Struggling to her feet, she went to the window and saw Hunter dismounting, his shirt soaked with sweat and dirt streaking his face. Pete was beside him, leading a horse that was clearly injured, blood staining its front leg. Josephine hurried outside despite the heat. "What happened?" Hunter looked up, his expression grim. "Found Ember here caught in a trap by the north pasture. Someone set steel jaws right on our property." "Blackwell?" Pete spat, his weathered face contorted with anger. "Had to be. This is the third thing this month. First the shot calves, then a section of fence mysteriously cut, allowing a dozen cattle to wander onto a neighbor's land, and now this." The pattern was clear and escalating. "Let's get her to the barn," Hunter said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I'll need hot water and clean cloth," he added to Josephine. She nodded, hurrying back to the house as fast as her condition would allow. By the time she brought the supplies to the barn, Hunter and Pete had the mare in a stall, Hunter kneeling beside the injured leg. The wound was ugly, a deep gash where the steel jaws had bitten into flesh. "Will she be all right?" Josephine asked, handing Hunter a clean cloth. "Should be if we can keep infection out." He worked methodically, cleaning the wound, his hands gentle despite the anger she could sense simmering just below the surface. "She's a good horse, didn't deserve this." Josephine placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "None of this is deserved. Blackwell's a coward, attacking animals to get to you." Hunter looked up at her, a flash of surprise in his eyes followed by gratitude. "Thank you for understanding." "Of course I understand. This is my home too now, our home." Something in Hunter's expression shifted, softening. For a moment, Josephine thought he might say something more, but Pete cleared his throat. "I'll ride into town, fetch the doctor," he said. "He might have something to help with infection." Hunter nodded. "Good idea. Take the Winchester and keep your eyes open. Whoever set that trap might still be around." After Pete left, Hunter and Josephine worked together to tend to Ember. Despite her condition, Josephine insisted on helping, holding the mare's head and speaking soothingly while Hunter bandaged the wound. "You're good with her," Hunter observed. "Not everyone has a touch for horses." "My father raised horses," Josephine said, stroking Ember's nose. "Before he died, it was a small operation, nothing like this, but I grew up around them." "You never mentioned that before." Josephine shrugged. There's a lot we don't know about each other, I suppose. Hunter paused in his work, looking up at her. I'd like to change that, if you're willing. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Josephine. I'd like that too. For the next hour, as they continued to tend to Ember, they talked. Really talked, for perhaps the first time since their hasty marriage. Hunter told her about growing up in Tennessee, about losing his mother to tuberculosis when he was 12, about his difficult relationship with his father. Josephine shared stories about her childhood in Missouri, her move to Texas with her parents, the fever that took both of them when she was 18, leaving her alone in the world until she met Thomas. How did you meet him? Hunter asked quietly, the question she'd been half expecting but dreading nonetheless. Thomas. He came to Sonora to open a leather goods shop. I needed work, and he hired me to help with sewing saddles and bridles. She smiled at the memory. He was kind and funny and so passionate about his craft. We were friends for a year before he courted me. You loved him very much, Hunter said. It wasn't a question. I did, Josephine admitted. I still do in a way, but it's different now, more like honoring a memory than a living feeling. She hesitated, then added, Does that bother you? Hunter shook his head. No, it would be strange if you didn't still care for him. He was your first love, and he's the father of your child. The simple acceptance in his words brought unexpected tears to Josephine's eyes. She blinked them away, embarrassed. Sorry, she murmured. It seems I cry at the slightest thing these days. Hunter smiled. Pete says his wife was the same way when she was carrying their children, says it's just part of bringing new life into the world. Pete's a wise man, Josephine said, returning his smile. They finished tending to Ember in companionable silence. As they left the barn, Hunter placed a gentle hand on Josephine's lower back, guiding her toward the house. The touch was protective, but there was something more to it, a tenderness that hadn't been there before. That evening, after a simple supper, they sat on the porch as usual, watching the sunset. But instead of reading or sewing, they continued talking, sharing stories and thoughts as if making up for all the conversations they should have had before becoming husband and wife. When Josephine finally rose to retire for the night, she paused at her bedroom door. Thank you, Hunter. For what? For today, for listening, for understanding about Thomas. He nodded, his eyes soft in the lamplight. Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with your past. There was a moment of charged silence, both of them aware that something had changed between them, though neither was ready to name it. Good night, Hunter. Good night, Josephine. As she closed her door, Josephine leaned against it, her hand drifting to her belly where the baby was moving again. For the first time since learning of her pregnancy, she felt not just acceptance or resignation, but genuine hope for the future for herself, for her child, and for the man who had so unexpectedly become such an important part of her life. The next morning, Josephine awoke to the sound of voices, many voices, more than the usual quiet conversations between Hunter and his ranch hands. Dressing quickly, she made her way to the main room to find Hunter, Pete, and Micah deep in discussion with 3 other men she recognized as neighboring ranchers. Ah, Josephine, Hunter said, coming to her side. I'm sorry if we woke you. What's happening? She asked, noting the serious expressions on the men's faces. Frank Wilson here found 2 of his cattle shot last night, Hunter explained, indicating a tall, thin man with a shock of white hair. And Bill Peterson lost a horse to a trap similar to the one that caught Ember. Blackwell, Josephine said with certainty. Frank Wilson nodded grimly. Has to be. He's been trying to buy out all of us for months. When offers didn't work, he started with the threats. Now it seems he's making good on them. We need to do something, said the third man, a stocky Mexican rancher named Manuel Ortiz. This cannot continue. What do you suggest? Hunter asked. We have no proof it's Blackwell or his men. We could set watches, Pete suggested. Take turns patrolling each other's land. That might help catch them in the act, Bill Peterson agreed, but it doesn't solve the larger problem. Blackwell won't stop until he gets what he wants. Or until someone stops him, Micah said quietly. It was the most Josephine had ever heard the young man speak at once. There was a heavy silence as the implication of his words sank in. Finally, Hunter shook his head. We're not vigilantes. We do this by the law or not at all. The law, Frank scoffed. Sheriff Davis is in Blackwell's pocket, has been for years. Then we go over his head, Hunter insisted. The ranger station in Del Rio is 50 miles away, Manuel cut in. And rangers have bigger problems than a few shot cattle. The debate continued, growing more heated as each man voiced his frustrations and fears. Josephine moved to the kitchen, putting coffee on to boil and slicing bread. These men needed to talk, but they also needed to eat. As she worked, she listened to the discussion in the other room. The situation was more serious than Hunter had led her to believe. Blackwell wasn't just targeting Hunter's ranch, he was systematically pressuring every small rancher in the area. And from the sounds of it, he was winning. When she brought out coffee and bread, the men fell silent, as if suddenly remembering there was a woman present, and a pregnant one at that. Their awkwardness might have amused Josephine under different circumstances. "Don't mind me," she said, setting down the tray. "I'm just providing sustenance for your planning." Hunter gave her a grateful smile. "Thank you." As the men ate, the conversation shifted to more practical matters, organizing patrols, setting up signals if trouble was spotted, agreeing to send word at the first sign of Blackwell or his men. "What about town?" Josephine asked suddenly, causing all heads to turn toward her. "What about it?" Frank asked, his tone suggesting he didn't see the relevance. "Blackwell may have the sheriff in his pocket, but he doesn't own the whole town. People there should know what's happening. The newspaper editor, for one." "Samuel Wright," Hunter said thoughtfully. "He's a fair man, not easily intimidated." "Exactly. If what Blackwell's doing becomes public knowledge, he might find it harder to continue." The men exchanged glances, considering her words. It was Bill Peterson who finally nodded. "The lady has a point. Blackwell's wealthy, but he still needs to do business in Sonora. If people start refusing to sell to him or raise their prices or just generally make his life difficult. It might not stop him, but it would certainly complicate things for him," Hunter agreed. He looked at Josephine with new respect. "That's a good idea." The meeting concluded with a plan. Hunter would ride into Sonora to speak with Samuel Wright, while the other ranchers organized patrols of their properties. They would meet again in 3 days to assess the situation. After the men left, Hunter turned to Josephine. "I'm sorry to involve you in all this. Don't apologize. I'm your wife. This affects me too." The words came naturally without thought, but they hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. She was his wife in name if not in the full sense of the word, but increasingly the distinction seemed to matter less. "Yes," Hunter said finally. "You are." He hesitated, then added, "I'm riding into town today to speak with Wright. Would you like to come?" It might do you good to get out, see people. The invitation surprised her. Since Martha Jenkins' visit, Josephine had avoided town, fearing the gossip and judgment that would inevitably follow her. But perhaps Hunter was right, hiding away only fed the rumors, and she was tired of living in fear. "Yes," she decided, "I would like that." 2 hours later, they were in the wagon heading toward Sonora. Hunter had insisted on taking the wagon rather than riding horseback, concerned about Josephine's comfort. The gesture touched her, one of many small kindnesses he had shown her since their marriage. As they approached town, Josephine felt her anxiety rising. It had been nearly 2 months since she'd been to Sonora, and in that time her pregnancy had become unmistakable. There would be no hiding now, no pretending. Hunter seemed to sense her unease. "We don't have to do this," he said. "I can take you back home." "No," Josephine said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm ready." The streets of Sonora were busy with the usual midday activity shoppers at the general store, men lounging outside the saloon, children playing in the shade of the large oak that dominated the town square. As Hunter guided the wagon down Main Street, heads turned. Conversations paused. Whispers began. Josephine kept her head high, though she could feel the heat of a blush on her cheeks. Hunter's hand covered hers briefly, a silent show of support that gave her strength. They stopped in front of the Sonora Sentinel office, a small building wedged between the millinery shop and the barber. Hunter helped Josephine down from the wagon, his hands steady at her waist. The touch, practical as it was, sent an unexpected warmth through her. Samuel Wright was a tall, rail, thin man with spectacles perched on a prominent nose. He looked up from his printing press as they entered, his eyebrows rising at the sight of Josephine's condition. "Mr. and Mrs. Dawson," he greeted them, quickly recovering his composure. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you to the Sentinel?" "We have a story you might be interested in, Mr. Wright," Hunter said, getting straight to the point. "About Jeremiah Blackwell and his methods of acquiring land." Wright's expression grew serious. "I see. Perhaps we should sit down." For the next hour, Hunter laid out the pattern of intimidation and sabotage that Blackwell had been employing against the small ranchers of the area. Wright took meticulous notes, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. Josephine added her own observations, including the thinly veiled threats made during Blackwell's visit to their ranch. "This is serious," Wright said when they'd finished, but without direct evidence linking Blackwell to these incidents. "We understand the need for caution," Hunter acknowledged. "We're not asking you to accuse him outright, just to report on what's happening. Let people draw their own conclusions." Wright nodded slowly. "I can do that." A piece on the challenges facing small ranchers, the suspicious pattern of incidents, the growing monopoly of certain large landowners. "Yes, I think that would be appropriate." "Thank you," Hunter said, standing to shake the editor's hand. "When might this appear?" "The next edition goes out on Friday. I'll make it the front page." As they left the newspaper office, Josephine felt lighter than she had in months. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it felt significant, a step toward justice, toward standing up rather than hiding. "Would you like to get something to eat before we head back?" Hunter asked. "The hotel dining room serves a decent lunch." Josephine hesitated. Entering the newspaper office was one thing, dining in public was another level of exposure entirely. But the determined set of Hunter's jaw told her he was prepared to face down the entire town on her behalf. "Yes," she decided. "I'm quite hungry, actually." The hotel dining room fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to observe the couple. Josephine felt the weight of those stares, the judgment in them, but Hunter's hand at the small of her back gave her courage. He led her to a table by the window, pulling out her chair with a flourish that almost made her laugh despite her nervousness. "Mrs. Dawson," he said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "I believe the chicken and dumplings are especially good today." His deliberate use of her married name, his casual manner, as if they were any other couple out for a meal, it was a performance for the benefit of the onlookers, but Josephine found herself responding to it naturally. "That sounds lovely, Mr. Dawson," she replied, matching his tone. "Though I confess I'm tempted by the apple pie as well." "Then you shall have both," he declared, signaling the waitress who approached their table with visible reluctance. Gradually, conversations resumed around them, though Josephine could feel curious glances still being cast their way. She focused on Hunter, on the menu, on anything but the whispers she could almost hear. They were halfway through their meal when the door to the dining room opened, and Martha Jenkins entered with two other women from the church committee. Martha spotted them immediately, her mouth tightening into a thin line. For a moment, Josephine hoped she might choose to ignore them. Instead, Martha marched directly to their table, her companions trailing behind like dutiful soldiers. "Mrs. Dawson," Martha said, her gaze fixing pointedly on Josephine's belly, "I see your condition has progressed significantly since my visit." "Yes," Josephine agreed calmly. "That's generally what happens with pregnancy, Martha." Behind Martha, one of the women, Ellen Parker, the minister's wife, poorly concealed a surprised laugh with a cough. Martha's eyes narrowed. "Indeed. And when might we expect the happy event? I'm trying to calculate, you understand, given the timing of your marriage." The implication was clear and cruelly intended. Josephine felt Hunter tense beside her, but before he could speak, she placed a hand on his arm. "The baby is due in September," she said, her voice steady. "Not that it's anyone's business but ours. But since you've taken such an interest, Martha, I'll be sure to send word when our child arrives. Now, if you'll excuse us, we were enjoying our meal." Martha's face flushed an angry red. Well, is there a problem here? A new voice joined the conversation as Sheriff Davis approached the table. A burly man with a bushy mustache, he looked uncomfortable to be involved but evidently felt some intervention was necessary. No problem, Sheriff, Hunter said easily. Mrs. Jenkins was just leaving, weren't you, madam? Martha sputtered, clearly unused to being dismissed, but Ellen Parker gently took her arm. Come, Martha, I believe our table is ready. With a final glare, Martha allowed herself to be led away. Sheriff Davis lingered, his gaze moving between Hunter and Josephine. Heard you been having trouble out at your place, Dawson, he said. Cattle shot, horse injured. That's right, Hunter confirmed, his tone neutral. Among other things, any idea who might be responsible? Hunter met the sheriff's gaze directly. I have my suspicions. As do my neighbors who have experienced similar problems. Davis shifted uncomfortably. Well, if you have any proof, you bring it to me. That's how the law works. Of course, Sheriff, I'm well aware of how the law is supposed to work. The emphasis on supposed to wasn't lost on Davis, who frowned. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning I expect the law to be applied equally to all citizens, regardless of their wealth or influence. Davis's face darkened. You implying something about how I do my job, Dawson? Not at all, Hunter replied smoothly. Just stating my expectations as a tax-paying citizen of this county. For a tense moment, it seemed Davis might pursue the matter further, but finally he just nodded curtly. You have a good day now, Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson. With that, he turned and left the dining room. Josephine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was interesting. Hunter took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. Davis knows something. He's caught between Blackwell and doing his job properly. Do you think our visit to the newspaper will make a difference? I don't know, but it's better than doing nothing. Hunter reached across the table, covering her hand with his. You handled Martha Jenkins beautifully, by the way. I was impressed. Josephine felt a flush of pleasure at his praise. I'm tired of hiding, Hunter, tired of being ashamed of something that isn't shameful. His eyes held hers, warm with admiration. I'm glad to hear it, because you have nothing to be ashamed of, Josephine, nothing at all. In that moment, surrounded by the whispers and stares of Sonora's citizens, Josephine felt a surge of something unexpected, not just gratitude toward Hunter, but a deeper feeling, one she wasn't quite ready to name. But it was there, growing stronger with each day, each conversation, each shared moment of understanding. As they finished their meal and prepared to return to the ranch, Josephine found herself looking forward to the journey, not just because it would take them away from the prying eyes of town, but because it meant more time alone with Hunter, more opportunity to explore this new and unexpected feeling blossoming between them. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape. Hunter and Josephine talked easily, the shared experience in town having forged a deeper connection between them. As they discussed their encounter with Martha Jenkins and Sheriff Davis, Josephine found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in months. Did you see her face when you mentioned September? Hunter chuckled. I thought she might swallow her teeth. She's been trying to catch me in a scandal since I arrived in Sonora, Josephine said, shaking her head. As if a widow living alone and supporting herself was somehow immoral. Some people need others to judge, makes them feel better about their own lives, I suppose. Josephine studied his profile, struck by the simple wisdom of his words. You're an unusual man, Hunter Dawson. He glanced at her, a smile playing at his lips. Is that a compliment? I believe it is. She hesitated, then added, thank you for today, for everything, really. Hunter's expression softened. You don't need to keep thanking me, Josephine. This arrangement benefits me too, you know. Does it? She asked, genuinely curious. How? He was silent for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. I was lonely, he finally said. I didn't realize how lonely until you came. A ranch isn't just land and cattle, it's meant to be a home. You've made it that. The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. Before she could respond, however, they crested a hill and the ranch came into view along with 3 riders heading rapidly away from the main house. Hunter tensed immediately, urging the horses to a faster pace. Something's wrong. As they drew closer, Josephine could see Pete standing in front of the house, rifle in hand. Smoke was rising from behind the barn. "Pete," Hunter called as they pulled up. "What happened?" Blackwell's men, Pete spat, his weathered face tight with anger. "Or at least 3 riders who made sure I didn't get a good look at them. Set fire to the hay storage. Is it contained?" Hunter was already jumping down from the wagon. "Micah's on it. Got most of it out, but we lost a fair amount of hay." Hunter helped Josephine down. "Stay here," he told her before running toward the barn with Pete. Ignoring his instruction, Josephine followed as quickly as her condition would allow. Behind the barn, Micah was beating at smoldering hay with a wet blanket, his face streaked with soot. The fire was mostly out, but the damage was evident. At least half their stored hay was destroyed. "Are you all right?" she asked Micah, who nodded grimly. "Yes, madam, got to it pretty quick." Hunter was surveying the damage, his expression hard. "This is escalating. First animals, now property." "What do we do?" Josephine asked, her hand instinctively going to her belly. The baby kicked as if sensing her distress. Hunter turned to Pete. "Did you recognize any of them? One might have been Malone, but I couldn't swear to it. They wore bandanas over their faces." "Cowards," Hunter muttered. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of ash. "All right. From now on, nobody's alone on the property. We work in pairs, we set watches at night." He looked at Josephine. "And you stay close to the house." She wanted to protest, but knew he was right. In her condition, she couldn't run if trouble came, couldn't defend herself effectively. The thought of being a liability to Hunter and his men chafed, but the safety of her unborn child had to come first. "I'll prepare supper," she said instead. "You'll all need food after this." Hunter's expression softened slightly. "Thank you." As Josephine walked back to the house, she felt a growing sense of unease. The attack on the ranch was a clear message from Blackwell: sell or suffer. Would a newspaper article really make any difference against a man willing to resort to such tactics? Inside, she busied herself with preparations for supper, trying to push away the worry. She was setting the table when she heard a commotion outside, horses approaching at speed. Going to the window, she saw Frank Wilson and Manuel Ortiz riding into the yard, both men looking grim. She opened the door as Hunter came from the direction of the barn to meet them. "What's happened?" he called. "Blackwell's made his move," Frank said, dismounting with a wince. Josephine noticed he was favoring his right arm. "Sent men to my place and Manuel's at the same time they hit yours." "Are you hurt?" Josephine asked, noticing a dark stain on Frank's sleeve. "Just a graze," Frank said dismissively. "One of them took a shot when I tried to follow." "They set fire to my south pasture," Manuel added, his accent thickening with anger. "Killed 2 of my cows that were caught in it." Hunter's expression darkened further. 3 attacks in one day. He's not even pretending anymore. "Sheriff?" Frank asked, though the question was clearly rhetorical. "Worth a try, I suppose," Hunter sighed. "Though I doubt Davis will do much." "I'll ride in," Pete volunteered. "Better than nothing." Hunter nodded. "Take Micah with you. No one rides alone from now on." He turned to Frank and Manuel. "You 2 better stay here tonight. We'll figure out our next move in the morning." Josephine stepped forward. "I'll tend to that arm, Mr. Wilson, and then supper will be ready for everyone." As the men dispersed to their various tasks, Josephine led Frank inside and set about cleaning and bandaging his wound. It was indeed just a graze, but it could easily have been much worse. "You're good at this," Frank commented as she worked. "My father was prone to injuries," she explained. "I learned early how to patch him up." Frank studied her, his weathered face thoughtful. "Dawson's lucky to have found you." Josephine smiled slightly. "I think perhaps I'm the lucky one. Seems to me you're good for each other." Frank winced as she tied off the bandage. "He was a different man before you came along, kept to himself, didn't say much. Now he's leading this fight against Blackwell, speaking up in town. I hardly think that's my doing." "Don't you?" Frank gave her a knowing look. "A man fights harder when he has something to fight for." His words stayed with Josephine as she finished preparing supper. Did Hunter see her that way, as something worth fighting for? The thought warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the summer heat or the stove's fire. That night, with Pete and Micah in town, Frank and Manuel took the first watch. Hunter insisted on taking the second shift himself, despite Josephine's concerns that he needed rest. "I'll sleep when I can," he told her as they stood on the porch, the night sounds of the Texas range surrounding them. "You should get some rest, though. It's been a long day." "I'm worried, Hunter," she admitted. "This feels like it's spiraling into something dangerous." He didn't try to dismiss her fears with platitudes, which she appreciated. "It is dangerous. Blackwell's a desperate man. He's invested too much in buying up land to back down now." "But why? What's so important about owning all this land?" Hunter leaned against the porch railing, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "Railroads," he said simply. "There's talk the Texas and Pacific is planning a spur line through this area. Land that's worthless now will be worth a fortune if the railroad comes through. And Blackwell wants to control it all," Josephine realized, "to set his own price." "Exactly, but he can only do that if he owns the key parcels like mine with the water rights and Frank's, which is on the most likely route for the tracks." Josephine shivered despite the warm night. "What will happen tomorrow?" Hunter straightened, moving closer to her. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever comes, we'll face it together." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of commitment that touched Josephine deeply. "Together," she echoed, her hand finding his in the darkness. For a long moment they stood there, hands clasped, the night wrapping around them like a cloak. Then, in a gesture that felt as natural as breathing, Hunter drew her into his arms, holding her carefully to accommodate her rounded belly. Josephine leaned into him, taking comfort in his strength, his solidity. "I won't let anything happen to you or the baby," he murmured against her hair. "I swear it." "I know," she whispered back, and she did know with a certainty that defied logic. This man, whom she had married out of desperation only months ago, would protect her with his life if necessary. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. As they separated, their eyes met in the moonlight. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the feelings that had been growing, unspoken but undeniable. Hunter's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heartbeat, Josephine thought he might kiss her, not the brief, perfunctory kiss of their wedding ceremony, but a real kiss born of genuine desire. But the moment passed, Hunter stepping back with a gentle smile. "Good night, Josephine. Try to rest." "Good night," she replied, a mixture of relief and disappointment washing through her. "Wake me if anything happens." "I will." As she retired to her room, Josephine found her thoughts in turmoil. The danger from Blackwell was real and immediate, but it was her evolving feelings for Hunter that truly unsettled her. She had married him for protection, for respectability. She had not expected to care for him, to admire him, to find herself wondering what it would be like to truly be his wife in every sense. Thomas had been gone less than a year. Was it disloyal to feel this way about another man? Or was it simply the natural progression of life, especially out here in the West where death was a constant companion and the living had to go on? The baby kicked, as if offering its own opinion on the matter. Josephine smiled, placing a hand on her belly. "You're right," she whispered. "Life goes on, and perhaps happiness is possible again." With that thought providing some measure of peace, she drifted into a fitful sleep, dreaming of steel traps and fires, of Martha Jenkins' accusing face, and finally, comfortingly, of Hunter's arms around her, keeping the dangers at bay. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the sun rising in a cloudless Texas sky that promised another scorching day. Josephine awoke early, her back aching from the weight of her pregnancy. For a moment she lay still, listening to the sounds of the ranch coming to life, men's voices, the nickering of horses, the distant lowing of cattle. When she emerged from her room, she found Hunter at the kitchen table with Frank and Manuel, cups of coffee in front of them, their expressions grave. "Good morning," she said, moving to the stove to prepare breakfast. Hunter looked up, his face softening at the sight of her. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," she hedged, not wanting to worry him with her discomfort. "Any news from town?" The three men exchanged glances. It was Frank who answered. "Pete and Micah got back an hour ago. Sheriff Davis listened to their report, wrote it all down nice and proper, and said he'd look into it." The skepticism in Frank's voice made the sheriff's intentions clear. He won't do anything, Josephine concluded. Not likely, Manuel agreed, his dark eyes troubled. Not until someone is killed, perhaps not even then. Hunter rose, coming to Josephine's side as she cracked eggs into a bowl. Wright is running the story in tomorrow's paper. It might not change Davis's mind, but it will put pressure on him from the townspeople. If they care, Frank muttered. They'll care, Josephine said firmly. Sonora isn't just Blackwell and Davis. There are good people there who value fairness. And even those who don't still need to do business with the ranches in the area. Hunter smiled at her confidence. That's what I told them. We just need to hold out until public opinion turns against Blackwell. And if it doesn't, Manuel asked, Hunter's smile faded. Then we consider other options. The grim determination in his voice sent a chill through Josephine. She knew without asking that those other options would involve confrontation, perhaps violence. The thought of Hunter facing Blackwell and his hired guns made her blood run cold. She busied herself with breakfast, trying to focus on the immediate task rather than the looming danger. The men continued their discussion, planning patrols and defenses, while Josephine served eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Pete and Micah joined them, having gotten a few hours' sleep after returning from town. As they ate, Hunter laid out the day's plan. Pete and Micah will ride the northern boundary. Frank, if you're up to it, you and Manuel take the east side. I'll cover the south and west. And me. Josephine asked. Hunter hesitated. I'd prefer you stay near the house. I can still be useful, she insisted. If nothing else, I can watch from the porch with the spyglass. If I see anything suspicious, I can fire the shotgun into the air as a warning. The men looked surprised at her suggestion, but Hunter nodded slowly. That's not a bad idea, just be careful, don't take any risks. After breakfast, the men departed on their patrols, leaving Josephine alone at the ranch house. Despite her brave words, she felt vulnerable and exposed. The shotgun Hunter had left her was a reassuring weight in her hands, but she prayed she wouldn't need to use it. From the porch, she had a good view of much of the ranch, especially with the spyglass. She spent the morning scanning the horizon, watching for any sign of trouble. The heat grew oppressive as noon approached, and Josephine retreated inside briefly to get a drink of water. She was returning to her post when she heard the sound of approaching riders. Heart pounding, she raised the spyglass, focusing on the dust cloud rising from the south road. 3 riders moving fast. As they drew closer, she recognized the lead rider with a chill of apprehension, Jeremiah Blackwell himself, flanked by Jake Malone and another of his hired guns. Josephine's hand tightened on the shotgun. Hunter was patrolling the south boundary. If Blackwell had come that way, they might have already encountered each other. The thought spurred her into action. Pointing the shotgun skyward, she fired one barrel, the report echoing across the ranch. The approaching riders pulled up momentarily at the sound, then continued forward, more cautiously now. Josephine reloaded the empty barrel with hands that shook slightly. She wouldn't fire the warning again. She might need both barrels if Blackwell and his men meant harm. By the time the riders reached the yard, Josephine was standing on the porch, shotgun not quite pointed at them but ready to be raised if necessary. Blackwell reined in his horse, his florid face shining with sweat beneath his expensive hat. "Mrs. Dawson," he called, his voice falsely jovial. "My apologies for startling you. I was hoping to speak with your husband." "Mr. Dawson is not available at the moment," Josephine replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm afraid you've had a wasted journey, Mr. Blackwell." Blackwell dismounted, ignoring her implied dismissal. "Perhaps you might pass along a message then. A new offer for this property 20% above my previous one, a very generous sum." "My husband is not interested in selling Mr. Blackwell at any price. He's made that quite clear." Blackwell's false smile slipped, his eyes hardening. "With all due respect, Mrs. Dawson, this is business best discussed between men. Perhaps when your husband returns, my husband and I discuss all matters pertaining to our ranch, Mr. Blackwell." Josephine cut in, her temper rising. "And his answer remains the same as mine. This land is not for sale." Malone, still mounted, spat on the ground. Told you, boss, waste of time talking. These small ranchers need more persuasion. Blackwell shot him a warning glance before turning back to Josephine. Mrs. Dawson, I understand your attachment to this place, but surely in your condition you must consider what's best for your family. The incidents of late, the cattle, the hay, these things happen on the frontier. Life can be dangerous for a woman alone. The threat, thinly veiled as concern, made Josephine's blood boil. I am not alone, Mr. Blackwell, and if you're referring to the attacks on our property and our neighbors, I believe we all know the source of those incidents. Blackwell's face darkened. Are you accusing me of something, Mrs. Dawson? I'm stating facts, Mr. Blackwell, facts that will soon be known to everyone in Sonora thanks to tomorrow's edition of the Sentinel. It was a calculated risk, revealing their hand, but Josephine wanted to see his reaction. She wasn't disappointed. Blackwell's face went from ruddy to pale in an instant, his composure slipping. Wright wouldn't dare print unsubstantiated accusations, he blustered. There's nothing unsubstantiated about 3 ranches being attacked on the same day, Josephine replied calmly. Or about the pattern of harassment that follows your land offers. The people of Sonora aren't fools, Mr. Blackwell. They can draw their own conclusions. Malone had drawn his horse closer, his hand resting near his pistol. Boss, maybe we should just— That's enough, Blackwell snapped. He glared at Josephine, all pretense of civility gone. You're making a serious mistake, Mrs. Dawson. Your husband too. I've been patient, generous even, but my patience has limits. Josephine raised the shotgun slightly, making her meaning clear. So does mine, Mr. Blackwell. I believe our conversation is over. For a tense moment, Josephine thought Blackwell might push the confrontation further. Malone certainly looked eager to do so, his eyes cold as he assessed her. But the sound of an approaching rider from the direction of the south pasture made them all turn. Hunter appeared over the rise, riding hard, his rifle drawn. Behind him, Josephine could see Pete and Micah also approaching from the north, alerted by her warning shot. Blackwell's expression twisted with anger, but he quickly mastered it, composing his features into a mask of indifference. Another time, perhaps, he said to Josephine, remounting his horse. Give my regards to your husband. As Hunter thundered into the yard, Blackwell and his men were already turning to leave. The 2 groups passed each other with nothing more than hard stares and tense postures. Hunter continued to Josephine, dismounting so quickly he almost threw himself from the saddle. Are you all right? He demanded, reaching her in 3 long strides. Did they hurt you? I'm fine, she assured him, lowering the shotgun as relief flooded through her. They just wanted to talk. Or so they claimed. Hunter's eyes were wild with concern as they scanned her for any sign of injury. Finding none, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, heedless of Pete and Micah riding into the yard, of Frank and Manuel approaching from the east, of anything but the need to hold her. When I heard the shot, he murmured against her hair, I thought, I'm fine, she repeated, allowing herself to sink into his embrace. Truly, he pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. What happened? What did Blackwell want? Josephine recounted the conversation as the other men gathered around, their faces growing darker with each detail she revealed. You told him about the newspaper? Frank asked, sounding concerned. That might push him to act before the story comes out. It might, Hunter agreed. Or it might make him more cautious, knowing his actions will be under scrutiny. He looked at Josephine with a mixture of pride and worry. It was a bold move. Maybe too bold, she admitted, but he made me angry, threatening us while pretending to be concerned. Hunter's lips twitched, almost forming a smile despite the seriousness of the situation. Remind me never to make you angry, Mrs. Dawson. The tension of the moment broken, they moved inside to discuss their next steps. The men agreed that they needed to alert Wright that Blackwell knew about the article in case he tried to prevent its publication. Pete volunteered to ride back to town with Micah for protection, and the rest of us, Manuel asked, do we wait for Blackwell to make his next move? We stay alert, Hunter said firmly. Double the watches tonight, no one goes anywhere alone. As the men dispersed to their various tasks, Hunter lingered in the house with Josephine. She could see the worry etched in his face, the tension in his shoulders. "I shouldn't have confronted him," she said softly. "I've made things worse." Hunter shook his head. "You stood your ground against a bully. I'm proud of you for that." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "I just wish you hadn't been alone when he came." "I wasn't really alone," Josephine said, touching his arm. "I knew you'd come if I signaled." His hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "I'll always come, Josephine, always." The simple declaration, delivered with such certainty, pierced straight to her heart. This wasn't just about protection or duty anymore, this was something deeper, something neither of them had expected when they'd entered into their arrangement. Before she could respond, a clatter of hooves announced a new arrival. Hunter tensed, his hand going to his pistol as he moved to the window. "It's Bill Peterson," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Wonder what brings him here." They went out to meet him, finding Bill dismounting with an agitation that was unusual for the normally composed rancher. "Dawson," he called, "you need to know Blackwell's gathering men, a lot of men. Sarah overheard it at the general store. They're planning something big for tonight." Hunter's expression hardened. "How many men? Dozen, maybe more. Hired guns from as far as Del Rio. Word is he's finally had enough of waiting. He means to drive all of us out tonight." The implications were clear. This wasn't going to be the sort of harassment they'd experienced before: cut fences, shot cattle. This was going to be a show of force designed to terrorize them into submission or flight. "We need to get word to town," Hunter said, his mind clearly racing. "Pete and Micah are on their way there already, but we need reinforcements." "The other ranchers," Frank suggested. "We could gather 20 men, maybe." Hunter shook his head. "Not enough against Blackwell's hired guns, and I won't risk more innocent lives." He turned to Bill. "Ride to Del Rio. Find Marshal Turner, tell him what's happening." "Del Rio's 50 miles away," Bill objected. "Even if I ride hard, I won't make it there and back with help before nightfall." "I know," Hunter said grimly, "but we need the law on our side for what comes after. Go, Bill, don't stop for anything." As Bill rode out, Hunter turned to the others. "Frank, Manuel, spread the word to the other ranchers. Tell them to be ready but not to engage unless Blackwell's men come onto their property. This is our fight." "Hunter," Josephine protested, "you can't face a dozen armed men with just yourself and the ranch hands." "No," he agreed, his expression somber, "which is why you're going to town. Now." "What? No, I'm not leaving you here to face this alone." Hunter took her hands in his eyes serious. "Josephine, please, I can't fight if I'm worried about you and the baby. Go to town, stay at the hotel. I'll send word when it's safe to return." "And if it's never safe," she challenged, "if Blackwell's men, if something happens to you?" The possibility hung in the air between them, too terrible to fully articulate. Hunter's grip on her hands tightened. "Then you'll be safe, you and the baby. That's what matters most to me." Josephine felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You matter to me, Hunter Dawson. I won't leave you to face this alone." "Josephine, no, this is my home too, our home. I won't be driven away by threats." Hunter's expression was a mixture of exasperation and admiration. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "So I've been told," she replied with a hint of a smile. He sighed, clearly recognizing the futility of further argument. "All right, but you stay in the house, away from windows, and if I tell you to run, you run. Promise me that at least." "I promise," she agreed, knowing it was the most he would get from her. "Now, what's the plan?" As the afternoon wore on, they prepared as best they could. Hunter sent Frank and Manuel to warn the nearby ranchers, while he, Pete, and Micah, who had returned from town with news that the Sentinel was indeed publishing the article as planned, fortified the ranch as much as possible. Windows were boarded, strategic firing positions established, extra ammunition distributed. Josephine kept busy preparing food, knowing the men would need strength for the night ahead. She tried not to think about what might happen once darkness fell, about the danger Hunter was facing would face to protect her and the land they now shared. As dusk approached, a tense calm settled over the ranch. Hunter found Josephine in the kitchen, storing the last of the food she'd prepared. "Pete's taking first watch," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Micah's at the barn. If anything happens, they'll signal. Josephine nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. So now we wait. Now we wait, Hunter agreed. He studied her for a long moment. Are you scared? Yes, she admitted, but not for myself, for you. He crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. I've been in tight spots before. I'll be careful. You better be, she said, her voice catching. I've lost one man I cared for. I don't think I could bear to lose another. The words slipped out before she could consider their implication, but once spoken, she wouldn't take them back. They were true, as terrifying as that realization was. Hunter's expression softened, vulnerability replacing the determined mask he'd worn all day. Josephine, he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. I never expected. When I asked you to marry me, it was to help you, to give your child a name. I didn't expect to feel this way. Neither did I, she whispered. It happened so gradually I hardly noticed until it was too late to stop it. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle as a summer breeze. Do you want to stop it? No, she admitted, her heart pounding. I don't. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like the brief touch of lips at their wedding. This was real, deep, a declaration of feelings too complex for words. Josephine leaned into it, her arms going around Hunter's neck as his encircled her waist, careful of her belly between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hunter rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid it was too much, too soon. I love you too, Josephine replied, the words feeling right, natural. And perhaps it is too soon by some measures, but out here, life moves at its own pace. Hunter smiled, the expression transforming his face, erasing the worry lines that had been etched there all day. When this is over, he said, I want us to start again. A real marriage, not just an arrangement, if that's what you want too. It's what I want, she assured him, her heart so full it felt it might burst. More than anything. A shout from outside shattered the moment. Riders coming, a lot of them. Hunter's expression hardened once more, the tender lover replaced by the determined protector. Stay here, he ordered, moving toward the door. Away from windows, remember? Be careful, she called after him. Come back to me, he paused, looking back at her one last time. I will, I promise. Then he was gone, and Josephine was alone with her fear and her hope, both battling for supremacy in her heart. The sounds of horses and men's voices drifted through the boarded windows. Josephine strained to hear what was happening, torn between her promise to stay hidden and her desperate need to know what was occurring outside. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty, she moved to the small gap in the kitchen window boards, peering out into the gathering darkness. Blackwell's men had formed a loose semicircle in the yard, at least a dozen of them, all armed. Blackwell himself sat on his horse at the center, with Jake Malone beside him. Opposite them, Hunter stood on the porch, Pete and Micah flanking him, rifles ready but not yet raised. Dawson, Blackwell's voice carried clearly in the evening air. I've come to make you one final offer. Sell to me now tonight and you and your men can ride out unharmed. My patience is at an end. This is still my land, Blackwell, Hunter replied calmly. You're trespassing. I suggest you leave before this turns into something you'll regret. Blackwell's laugh was harsh. Regret? Look around you, Dawson. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Be sensible, man. Think of your wife. I am thinking of her, Hunter said, his voice hard. I'm thinking she deserves to live on land that's rightfully ours, without fear of men like you. Malone leaned forward in his saddle. Enough talk, boss. Let's show him we mean business. His hand moved toward his pistol. Wait, Blackwell ordered, raising a hand. Dawson, I'm offering you a way out. No one needs to get hurt here. You've been hurting people for months, Hunter replied. Shot cattle, poisoned wells, burned pastures. It ends now, Blackwell, one way or another. The tension in the yard was palpable, even from Josephine's limited vantage point. She held her breath, waiting for the inevitable eruption of violence. But before Blackwell could respond, the sound of approaching riders came from the road to town. All heads turned as a group of horsemen rode into view. Josephine counted at least 15 men, led by a figure she recognized with surprise, Samuel Wright, the newspaper editor, with Sheriff Davis beside him. Behind them rode storekeepers, the blacksmith, the barber, and other townsfolk Josephine recognized from Sonora. "What's the meaning of this?" Blackwell demanded as the newcomers pulled up beside Hunter's position. Wright dismounted, stepping forward. "We got word you were planning something tonight, Blackwell. Thought we'd come see for ourselves." "This is none of your concern, Wright. This is business between me and Dawson." "When business involves threatening honest ranchers and destroying property, it becomes everyone's concern," Wright replied coolly. "The people of Sonora depend on these ranches. They trade with us, buy our goods, use our services. We can't stand by while you drive them out for your own profit." Blackwell's face had grown purple with rage. "Davis," he snapped, turning to the sheriff. "These men are interfering with a private business negotiation. Do your job." Sheriff Davis shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Seems to me this stopped being a business negotiation when you brought a dozen armed men to discuss terms, Jeremiah." The use of Blackwell's first name and the implicit rejection of his authority seemed to stun the big rancher momentarily. "You turn against me, Davis." "After all I've done for you," Davis straightened, something like dignity entering his posture for perhaps the first time in years. "I'm not turning against anyone. I'm doing my job keeping the peace. And right now, you and your men are the ones threatening that peace." Josephine watched, hardly daring to breathe, as Blackwell's gaze moved from Davis to Wright to the assembled townspeople, all watching him with expressions ranging from disapproval to outright hostility. His position, so strong only minutes before, had suddenly become untenable. "This isn't over, Dawson," he finally growled. "Railroad's coming. You'll regret not selling to me when you had the chance." "I doubt that very much," Hunter replied evenly. "Now, as I said before, you're trespassing on my land. Please leave." With a wordless snarl of rage, Blackwell yanked his horse's head around and spurred it into motion. His men followed, Malone casting a final, venomous glance at Hunter before riding out with his employer. As they disappeared into the darkness, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through everyone in the yard. Josephine, unable to contain herself any longer, hurried from the house to the porch, where Hunter was shaking hands with Wright and the other townsmen. "Mrs. Dawson," Wright greeted her with a smile. "I hope we didn't disturb your evening too much." Josephine laughed, the sound slightly hysterical with relief. "On the contrary, Mr. Wright, your timing was impeccable." Hunter moved to her side, his arm going around her waist. "How did you know?" he asked Wright. "About Blackwell's plans. Pete and Micah came to town with news of Blackwell's visit to your ranch," Wright explained. "While they were there, Bill Peterson's boy arrived, saying his father had gone to Del Rio for the marshal and that Blackwell was gathering men. We decided Sonora couldn't wait for the law to arrive. So you brought the town instead," Hunter said, clear admiration in his voice. "Not just the town," Sheriff Davis interjected. "The law too, such as it is." He looked uncomfortable but determined. "I've been looking the other way too long." "That ends tonight." "Better late than never, I suppose," Hunter said dryly, but he extended his hand to the sheriff, who shook it with visible relief. As the townspeople began to disperse, some heading back to Sonora, others accepting Hunter's invitation to stay for coffee and food, Josephine found herself overwhelmed with emotion. The danger had passed, at least for tonight. Hunter was safe. Their home was secure. And most miraculous of all, they had discovered something neither had expected when they'd entered into their practical arrangement love, real and deep and enduring. Later that night, after the last of the visitors had departed and the ranch had settled into an exhausted quiet, Hunter and Josephine stood together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled Texas sky. "You think Blackwell will try again?" she asked softly. Hunter considered the question. "Maybe, but not like this. He's lost the element of fear, and without that his position is much weaker, and with Davis finally doing his job. It's really over then, this chapter at least." Hunter turned to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "But our story is just beginning, isn't it?" Josephine smiled, leaning into his touch. "Yes, our story." 3 weeks later, as September arrived with the first hint of cooler weather, Josephine went into labor. Hunter, who had barely let her out of his sight since the confrontation with Blackwell, paced anxiously outside the bedroom door while Mrs. Peterson, who had experience as a midwife, attended to Josephine. The hours stretched on, Hunter's worry growing with each muffled sound of pain from the bedroom. Pete and Micah kept their distance, understanding that a man about to become a father needed space for his anxiety. Finally, as the sun began to set, a new sound filled the ranch house, the lusty cry of a newborn. Hunter froze, his heart pounding as Mrs. Peterson opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. "Come meet your son, Mr. Dawson," she said. "He's perfect." On trembling legs, Hunter entered the bedroom to find Josephine propped up against pillows, her face tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "Hunter," she whispered, "look at him. Isn't he beautiful?" Hunter sat carefully on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sight of the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. Red and wrinkled, with a dusting of dark hair, the baby was indeed beautiful, the most beautiful thing Hunter had ever seen. "He's amazing," he managed, his voice choked with emotion. "Just like his mother." Josephine smiled, adjusting the blanket to give Hunter a better view. "I thought we might name him Thomas after his father," she said softly. "Thomas Hunter Dawson, if that's all right with you." Hunter's heart swelled with love for this woman who, in acknowledging her past, was also embracing their future together. "It's perfect," he said, leaning forward to kiss her forehead. "He's perfect. You're perfect. Everything is perfect." As Hunter carefully took his son into his arms for the first time, he felt a sense of completion he had never known before. This was what he had been working for, building for, without even realizing it, not just a ranch, but a family, a home filled with love. "I love you," he told Josephine, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you, and we love you," she replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "Always." In the years that followed, the Dawson Ranch prospered. The railroad did indeed come to the area, but thanks to the support of the townspeople and the vigilance of Sheriff Davis, who had found his backbone at last, Blackwell was unable to monopolize the benefits. Instead, the economic growth lifted all the ranches in the region. Thomas Hunter Dawson grew into a strong, curious boy with his mother's spirit and his adoptive father's love of the land. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Emma Rose, and 2 years after that by another brother, James Frank. Josephine never returned to being the seamstress of Sonora, though she still occasionally made dresses for special occasions in town. Instead, she threw herself into ranch life, proving to be as skilled with cattle and horses as she was with needle and thread. Hunter, for his part, built the ranch into one of the most respected in the county, known for fair dealings and quality stock. But his greatest pride was always his family, the wife who had come to him in desperation and stayed for love, and the children they raised together in the house that had truly become a home. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Hunter took Josephine's hand, still slim and strong despite the years of ranch work. "You ever regret it?" he asked, "marrying me the way you did without love?" Josephine smiled, the years having only enhanced her beauty in Hunter's eyes. "I regret nothing," she said firmly. "How could I, when it brought me everything I never knew I wanted?" "Me too," Hunter agreed, raising her hand to his lips. "Though I think perhaps I was a little in love with you even then, from the first moment I saw you trying so hard to hide what couldn't be hidden." "And now," she teased, "only a little in love," Hunter laughed, pulling her close. Now I love you more than the land, more than the sky, more than life itself. And I always will." As the Texas sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, much as it had on that fateful day when Hunter had first felt his son kick beneath Josephine's heart, they shared a kiss that held all the promise of their past and all the hope of their future. A kiss that said, more eloquently than words ever could, that some things like true love never needed to hide again.